Hi everybody, it's Miss Austin, and today I'm going to be going through some notes on graphing transformations of sine and cosine. Last week you were asked to analyze the transformations and choose the correct functions for those. Today we're going to actually graph those. So the first one we're going to start out with is y equals 3 sine x minus 2. Okay, so last week you learned that this last number is the vertical shift or the midline. And then this first number in front of the whole thing is called your amplitude. And that is how far above and below this midline you go. So one way that I find helpful when learning how to graph these to begin with is creating kind of, it's like handwriting paper template. And I think you'll see what I mean in just a second here. So first I'm going to put in my midline. So normally sine, the midline, is here at 0, but it's been shifted down 2. Now you don't have to draw this in. And as you practice more, perhaps you don't need to. Okay, so this is like my new x-axis. Okay, now this tells me how far above and how far below my graph is going to go. It's going to go 3 above this, 1, 2, 3, and 3 below. So now you can just know that, or the first couple of times you're doing this, if you actually want to draw some guides in there for yourself, 1, 2, 3. So that's the highest it's ever going to go. And then 1, 2, 3, this is the lowest. So I think you might know what I'm talking about, the old handwriting paper that looked like this, right? So you knew how, when you were making like a lowercase k or something like that. It was a guide for you. Okay, I'm going to use these as guides for graphing my trig function. So we are graphing sine. Now, I'm going to show you how to do it just based by pattern, and then I'm also going to show you how, if you really wanted to, you could put values in for x and figure them out. Okay, I'm going to do it by pattern first. So the sine of 0 at the very beginning, you're normally, if you look back last week at your parent functions, sine starts on its midline. Well, my midline's right here. So you always start sine on its midline. And then think of yourself going around the unit circle. When you get up to pi over 2 or 90, sine is 1. That's the highest it ever gets. So 90 degrees later, you're up here at the highest it ever gets. Okay, now keep going around that unit circle. The sine at pi is 0 again, or your midline. So you're back to the middle. Okay, now you go down to 3 pi over 2 on your unit circle. Sine is -1. That's the lowest value for sine. Well, this is the lowest value for sine. And then when you get back to 2 pi, you're back where you started. I kind of also think about it like a Ferris wheel ride. And for sine, you're starting in the middle of the ride. And then you travel up to the highest, you come back to the middle, down to the lowest. Okay. And then normally when you graph trig functions, they'll ask you to graph 2 full cycles. Sometimes the 2 full cycles will go in the positive direction. Here we've got graph paper that also shows us a cycle in the negative values. So we're just going to repeat that pattern. So right before this started, it was down here at its lowest, middle, highest, middle. And you should see a repetitive pattern. I like to do dotted lines when I'm first filling it in, so I can make sure that I get a nice and I mean, you could plot more points in between, But every 90 degrees, those are nice, easy critical points to graph. And then this would just keep repeating over and over again. Okay, now if you wanted to actually calculate the values to plot them, let me show you how to do that. So let's say you wanted to put 0, right? You would put a 0 right here. Okay, so you'd go to your unit circle or in your fabulous mind. What is the sine of 0? It's 0. So this is 0. 0 times 3 is 0. And 0 take away 2 is -2. So when I'm at 0, I'm down at -2. Boom. Okay, let's try another one. If I put pi over 2 in here, imagine your unit circle. What is the sine at pi over 2? It's 1. Okay, 1 times 3 is 3, and 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay, when I'm at pi over 2, my graph is up at 1. So you actually can plug these values in here to convince yourself where you are, and you can also try to just think of it as the pattern. Okay, so let's try another one. This time we're going to try y equals 2 cos x plus 1. Okay, again, this is my midline, and this is my amplitude. I'm going to abbreviate it and just say amp, okay? So first put in your midline. Normally, sine and cosine both have a midline of 0, okay? But this time it's been shifted up 1. And if you want to create those guides for yourself, this is how far above and below this midline you're going to go. So I'm going to draw them in. Okay, now cosine, you could look last week at your notes with your parent function. This would be another thing for those of you going to pre-calc next year, to have a good copy of your unit circle and maybe parent functions of sine and cosine until you really get good at them. So normally cosine at 0, it does not start on its midline like sine does. Cosine starts up at its highest value. Okay. And then as you travel around the unit circle, when you go 90 degrees or pi over 2, it's at its middle value. Okay, now travel over to pi, think of a unit circle. The cosine is -1. That's the lowest value. You're at your lowest point. And then down at 3 pi over 2 on your unit circle, cosine is back to 0 or whatever your midline is. Okay, there's my midline. And then when you get all the way around 2 pi, you're back to where you started. So sine starts on its midline and travels up and down and then back to the midline. Cosine starts up at its highest value, travels down to its lowest and back up. Another helpful thing to remember when you're plotting points is you can never jump more than one level, right? There's kind of like 3 levels, your highest, your middle, and your lowest. So you would never go from here and plot it all the way down here, unless the frequency or there had been a phase shift. Okay, so now we'll go backwards. Came from its middle, down at its lowest, middle, highest. Okay, and we'll go through how to calculate those if the pattern is not making sense. You can also be using Desmos to check. Miss Eisencraft made a video of how to switch the x-axis to radians on Desmos so it will look like yours. Okay, let's actually calculate. So let's put a 0 in, right? Let's say, I wonder where this graph is at 0. So if you put a 0 in here, think of your unit circle. What is the cosine at 0? It's 1. 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 plus 1 is 3. So at 0, I'm up here at 3. Okay, pi over 2, 90 degrees. Think of your unit circle. What is the cosine of pi over 2? It's 0. So if you put a 0, cover this up, 0, 2 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus 1 is 1. At pi over 2, you're at 1. So you can actually calculate the values as well. So you're going to have a couple of these to try, and some like last week where you just pick the equation that matches the graph given, and a couple where we give you the function and we ask you to graph. I hope these help, and I'll talk to you soon.